Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Henrique. We're really excited to get to know you better today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're really excited, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into these questions. I know everyone wants to know about you. So for those that are not too familiar with Brex, would you mind giving just a quick intro?
So at Brex we do corporate cards. Corporate cards for your business, and we serve today startups, e-commerce, and life sciences companies.
Awesome. Now digging a little bit further into your background, Brex isn't your first startup, is it?
No, so I'm actually born and raised in Brazil, and I was kind of lucky to start coding when I was pretty young, because there was this game I wanted to play, and it was like this paid game, and my parents didn't want to pay it for me, and I figured out if I learned how to code, I could play it for free.
Wow.
So that's kind of like how I started out, and then I built kind of like a pirate version of this game. They got super popular in Brazil, and then after a little bit launched, because instead of charging like monthly fees, I let people play for free, and charge like freemium model, so to buy items inside the game. And it got super popular in Brazil. A lot of people were playing, and then they got these patent notifications saying I was infringing some patents. I didn't know what those were exactly, but my mom got super upset and told me to shut everything off.
So is this Pagar.me?
No, this is my first kind of like thing. And then, years later, I then worked at a startup, and then I just tried to start my own startup, and that was Pagar.me, which was a payment processing company down in Brazil. Like a PayPal or Stripe of Brazil. And, and then that was my first real startup.
Now that one you actually sold, is that right?
Yes.
Can you walk us through a little bit why you decided to sell it?
So we started this company, it was 2013, so I think it was like last year of high school. And we had a few things that happened. One, we both got into college, and we deferred it for 2 years, and Stanford basically said, either you come or you don't, you have to like pick one now. So I think that was one reason. We kind of wanted to try college out. The second reason was, we always looked at Silicon Valley and saw that everything that was being built here seemed so much larger. And we're like, if we're going to spend our lives, 10, 20, maybe 30 years working on something, it might as well be something that can be like really big, right?
Right.
And three, it was, we were like 20 and like poor, and it was a good offer, so.
So you took it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you start Pagar.me with your current co-founder? Was that somebody else?
Yeah, same co-founder.
Okay. So obviously it worked out. How did you guys meet, and how does it feel to be working with the same co-founder?
So it's funny. My co-founder and I, there's a funny story. So he also coded since he was a kid. And we met in the end of 2012, basically fighting on Twitter. So we were fighting about text editors. I was pro Vim, he was pro Emacs. And it got too complex to fight over 140 characters. We went to Skype. And on Skype, we became really good friends and decided to start a company together.
That's certainly a really cool meet cute.
Yeah.
Right? So when you sold Pagar.me, at what point was there a clear process that sort of led you into the fintech world? How did that happen?
It was slightly random. So what happened is, I worked at this startup, and then I tried to start my own startup that failed, this education company. And then I went to this hackathon and built this app which is called Ask Me Out, which is like Tinder, but instead of geolocation, it was Facebook friends. You could like and match your Facebook friends. So I did that. Turns out we won the hackathon, came back to Brazil and tried to launch it. And when we tried to launch it, we were like, okay, let's charge people to know who their match was. That was kind of like our first idea. And I had a really bad experience implementing payment methods in that kind of part of the system. And my co-founder Pedro, he got very hacker famous because he was the first person to find the jailbreak for the iPhone 3G. So in Brazil, no one knew a lot about iOS security, and so he was hired by Brazil's largest payments company to work on their app because to make it secure, because no one in Brazil knew about iOS security at that time. This was, maybe like 10 years ago or something like that. So he got into payments by working at Brazil's largest payments company. So whenever we met, we were like, hey, let's start a startup together. And like he was working at a payments company. I had a bad experience with payments. Let's try to do something better.
Awesome. And then, so fast forward a little bit. You mentioned that you had to choose to, go to Stanford, so move to the USA and do all of that. What was the thought process behind that? Did you think about, what you would miss in Brazil? Was it that difficult a decision?
The decision wasn't like hard because like, oh, would I miss Brazil or not? You can always travel both places, right? I think the decision was, the company we were doing was working. Like we were like 150 people, profitable, $1.5 billion in transaction volume. Like it was like working. And, we're going to come here to go to school to maybe start something that maybe works. It was kind of an unknown versus like staying there and kind of running and just growing this thing. It was definitely past product market fit and, in the scaling phase. So it's very de-risked. So that part was kind of like a big decision for us. And I think, as I said, I think we just deep down really wanted to build something much larger. And we thought by coming to the US, we could build something much larger.
And then you decided to leave Stanford.
Yes.
Before you, at what point did you leave? I think I heard it was
6
pretty
months
early.
in.
Yeah, so not even close to graduating.
No.
What did your family think about that decision?
So, honestly, they were pretty happy I went to Stanford in the first place because for the longest time I was saying I'm not going to go to college and like I'm just going to come stay here and run this company. So they was pretty happy I went in the first place. They're not as happy when I dropped out, but it was fine. I think, the feeling that we had is that we were in school and like all the world seemed to be like developing and moving and like we were kind of like there, like, doing homework, so.
Yeah. And it was, you decided to discontinue your studies for?
Yeah, so we decided to, so what happened was we got Silicon Valley, right? And we were like, okay, so we're in Silicon Valley. This is like the bleeding edge of technology. This is like where all the biggest innovation in the world happens. So, we're not going to do something stupid like fintech or payments, right? We're going to do something at the bleeding edge of technology. So we decided to try to start a VR company. Turns out that it is really hard. But we got into Y Combinator with it, thank God. And then in Y Combinator, we kind of decided to like pivot into something else because we had no idea what we were doing. And I think we just realized, after, dating VR that we actually loved payments, right?
Right.
So.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to know it a little bit and thought, no, not my thing.
No.
How soon into the program was that?
Like 3 weeks in.
3 weeks in.
Yeah, but we have been working for like maybe 3 or 4 months already and something.
So then you get into this fintech space. At
Yep.
what point did you start to feel like, maybe I'm onto something. This is a really good idea.
So Brex was a little bit different than I think the traditional startup, which was, every company, every startup needs a card. Like you cannot have a startup and not have a card. You need to buy, to buy AWS, you need a card, right? And so our question for product market fit wasn't like, if we build this, like, will people want what we're building? Our question for product market fit is, can we actually build this? Because if we do, we really believe people will want it. So because we went to ask companies like, if we give you a card of no personal guarantee, higher limits, better technology, and better rewards, will you use that card? And everyone was like, duh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the hard part was actually building it. So, I think it took a while for us to say, okay, like, I think we're actually like, going to make it work.
What were the steps that you took to sort of figure out what you needed to do to build this product?
Yeah, so, to start a credit card company, if anyone is interested in, hopefully in the consumer space, but you basically need to get 5 things right. The first one is you need to get a bank partner because you need to be a bank in order to originate credit. Or, it can be a lender, but you'll need a bank anyway to hold a license for either MasterCard or Visa to issue a card. You need to raise a bunch of equity because no bank's going to partner with you if you have no money. You need to raise a bunch of debt because, you need to fund your credit card with something that's not only your equity money. And you need to kind of have like senior leadership in a company to help you do all of that, right? So our first 2 hires at Brex were actually our CFO and our general counsel. Because in order to, get all those things done, we needed people that were experienced and, in kind of those areas. So it was kind of always a question like, will we be able to actually get all those things done, in parallel? And we didn't know for the longest time.
So you mentioned those 5 things, but you did need to do them in parallel.
Yeah.
Right? So it wasn't like a step-by-step thing.
No, it was like, I think we had to raise the equity first, but it's hard to raise equity because, you have no product,
Right.
And you have nothing. So people are just getting you equity for an idea, right? And you need a lot of it. Like, our first round was $7.5 million, which is not a small amount of money for, an idea. So you need to be able to do that, and then,
Was that a seed or a Series A, or what was that
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
We called it a Series A.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then after we did that, we're like, okay, so now we need to get the bank partner. But the bank partner said like, well, I won't, do it unless you have MasterCard. And MasterCard said, I won't do it unless you have a bank partner.
Right.
And like the debt partner said, I won't do it unless you have both.
So what advice, real quick, on that point in terms of when do you determine that a pivot is really a real pivot? And when do you think maybe we need to pivot again? Do you have like a few words of wisdom for everybody in here about that specifically?
That's kind of it's like, when is persistence, right? Do you keep going an idea until you find it? And when do you just give up and go to something else? The way we always thought, like not only ways we always thought about it, actually, this was fairly new thinking, but the way we learned to think about it was, VR was like a really hard thing. Like, why were we as founders gonna be Pedro and I, why are we gonna be the people that are gonna disrupt VR, right? And we kind of couldn't get a good answer to that. Like, if people are trying this, multiple places around the world, like, we know nothing about it, like, why are we gonna be able to do it? On payments, though, we had a great answer, which is like, well, we had sold, a payment startup before, so we know a lot about payments, so, we have some competitive advantage there in order to start this company. And I think, like, maybe, like, if credit cards hadn't worked, we would have tried some other product within fintech, but we kind of knew that fintech was like our thing. So I think like there's 2 separate pivots, right? Pivot the market and pivot the idea within the market. I think like to pivot the market, you need to just think like, hey, why am I, personally like a good founder to start this company? And to pivot within the market, it's just like fast iteration of, what's working, what's not working. Try to get something out there as quick as possible.
Were you ever worried about any big banks just replicating your product?
Not at all. If you actually visit a bank and talk to their technology team, they have these like old legacy infrastructures, and it's really, really, really hard to change. So till this day, like we're seeing banks reacting to Brex, and the thing they do is like, oh, I created like a Salesforce for startups, right? That's like the main thing they do.
Yeah. So you've decided on the idea, you feel confident about that, you've kind of walked through a little bit your decision-making process. Now let's go through that first 100 days of your build.
Yep.
How was that? Like, what were the steps that you took? So you did your 5 steps, you kind of got
So
everyone
no,
to
the
sign
5 steps
on.
took for a long
Those
forever.
still going on,
They were
okay.
still going. So we were doing the 5 steps and kind of coding the thing, at the same time. So it wasn't like, we did one and then we did the other. We kind of were running in parallel.
What was the timeline, just out of curiosity? From
So we started a company in March 17. We launched in June 18.
Okay.
So it was a year and 3 months building.
Yeah,
But then when we launched it, it worked pretty quickly.
wonderful. Now, in terms of determining, prioritizing what you wanted to start with in terms of building, how did you do that? What was your decision-making process behind all of these things?
I think that we always try to build, like, this is going to sound obvious, but the most important thing. So, credit cards has a big part, right? You have to be able to swipe your card, you have to be able to pay your bill, you need to be able to get your rewards, you need to be able to kind of like, do these kind of like basic things, and then we add the extra layer of software on top of it. So first, I think we built the core credit card infrastructure, and then we built kind of the softer differentiation, like, expense reporting and things like that on top of it.
Neat. Did you do any sort of like, did you do communications with customers, or did you test it on the market somehow? Was there any kind of?
We got a bunch, we were in YC, so it was helpful because we just got a bunch of our YC buddies to kind of like test it out for a while.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful, and then you get a lot of feedback from them, what worked, what doesn't work. But again, credit cards, they don't do a lot, so it took a while to get that basics, but after, anything we did was already better than the competition because the competition didn't do anything.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense, actually. It's sort of a vacuum that you're kind of building within, right? What did you do? So you're now coming from the fintech space, and you're building a product that is all fintech. What did you do to equip yourself with the knowledge or to learn about the industry? Were there specific things that you did that maybe you can?
The first time or the second time? The second time I definitely knew a lot about fintech.
Right, but was that, so the first time was in Latin America?
Yeah.
And so was there a lot that was?
Yeah, very transferable, yeah.
Okay.
Banks, they work kind of pretty similarly across the world. So in card networks like Visa and MasterCard, they actually have similar rules across the world, so there's like some nuance, but it's very applicable, actually.
Awesome. And then
the first time, if you asked about that one,
tell us.
we had no clue what we were doing. And so what we were lucky was we actually got an investor early on that knew a lot about payments and helped us out a lot.
Wonderful. Let me go to some questions from the audience here. So let's see this. Now, when YC it's accepted you as a VR company, and then you go to them and you're like, we're not going to do VR anymore. How supportive were they?
So we thought it was a huge deal, by the way. So we got there, and Pedro and I, we're planning shit. Like, what are we gonna say? We were like tense, and we got into the room. And
what time was that? Was it late at night? You kind of
just
got
your office
epiphany?
hours, so it was like maybe 4 p.m. or something.
All
like
right.
that. So we got there, and it was our partner Dalton, and we were like kind of scared. Like, we have to give them bad news. Like, let's offer to give them back the money really quickly, like just in the beginning, so they're not pissed at us. And they were like super fine. They're like, yeah, we kind of wanted you to pivot anyway. It didn't seem that good an idea. Whatever you want to build, like just do whatever you want. Like, why don't you try to explore this fintech thing that you guys like? And you're like, yeah, so they helped us actually a lot through it. Another one of the great companies that came from our batch was actually a different company and pivoted, and now is one of the companies that are doing better from our batch. So I think they see it all the time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the pivots, are better than the first one. So.
Awesome. Can you share some of the mistakes that you may have made when you first launched?
Yeah, I think like a mistake we made early on, in our first company, more than Brex, is I think the standard advice is like, don't raise too much money and try to pay your people, not that much money. Everyone needs to be like cash constrained. Honestly, like in such a competitive market like San Francisco, we benefited a lot from, diluting ourselves a little bit more, raising more money and paying people really well and, to attract talent. I think like and nowadays is a really tough advice to follow to, don't pay people well and raise little money because everything is so expensive in the city.
That's true. How did you deal with the regulations? So I know you mentioned banking is pretty similar across the different countries. I have a question here from a European founder. So they're asking about things, how would you launch in the EU? But do you want to talk a little bit about how you learned about the regulations, how you kind of educated yourself on that, and what you would do if you plan to launch in the EU?
Yeah, I think the most important thing about the regulation is if you need to think about a regulation as part of your product development. So I always say that building products in financial services it's a mix of engineering, finance, and regulatory. You need to think equally about those three pieces. It is not let me build the code and someone figure out the other stuff. It's like, it needs to be part of your product development to truly understand how the regulation works, truly understand the financial implications, and like build all that within the product. I think it's different than kind of like, traditional consumer companies, which is, let's build something that users want and then figure out how to monetize later. It needs to be built in early on how all of that is going to work together. In terms of launching in the EU, it'd probably be a similar process that we did here in the US. U has a little bit difference that you can get a direct license there. You don't need a bank in order to get a MasterCard or Visa license. So we would most likely do that.
Cool. I'm going to move a little bit to funding. So we've talked a little bit about how you decided to pivot, you've launched your product, and you're kind of starting to work. At what point did you start raising your Series A? And then what do you think was integral to actually convincing these investors to invest in you?
So, every time I have this a little bit weird fundraising method that I do this thing called a pre-round, and then I do a round. And a pre-round is just basically going to a bunch of investors, telling them your idea, saying you're not raising, and then, just gauging some interest to see if it's the right time to raise or not, and kind of gauge how much you could raise or not, and, kind of get a feeling for the market.
What are the signals that you're looking for? Just as a hint, everybody. Right?
Yeah, the signals are probably like how much people are following up after the meeting and wanting to know more, and good VCs, if they find a good idea, they kind of want to try to preempt it. So the more they're following up, the more they're interested. If they're not following up too much, you kind of know you need to work on the pitch a little bit, and then you try to change something and then go to the next one. So it's kind of how I refine the pitch, and kind of is just talking to a bunch of investors and trying to gauge that interest. So that was probably February or something like that, and then we raised the money in March.
Wow. Wait, so that was February was your pre-raise sort of round.
Yeah.
But then you ended up just going directly.
Yeah, and then the pre-raise went well.
Yeah. Clearly.
And then then we raised the money in March. But the other thing is, this is the other thing. We have a lot of thoughts on fundraising, but we always like to raise with people that we know for a while. We don't like to meet someone and ask them for money, in the same meeting. So most of the investors we talked to were investors that we had met during our first company, or during Stanford. We're kind of building those relationships, and not investors that we had just met.
So that's really key. So you had been spending time sort of fostering these relationships.
Yes.
They were all were you using them as advisors before this as well?
Not as advisors, informally as advisors. So just, kind of got some advice, got some feedback. But, I thought this was universal advice. And then I was on Twitter the other day, and a bunch of founders saying this never worked for them. Investors that they built relationships never invested. So I don't know, it worked for us, but didn't seem to work for some other folks.
Do you think there was anything specific in your pitch deck? Is there some advice you want to share about what to put in your pitch decks for any of the other potential founders out here?
Yeah, my main is that don't do a pitch deck.
Okay.
And the reason for that is you should be able to clearly articulate about your business. Most of the rounds, we actually built our pitch deck after we had signed a term sheet, because then someone was like, oh, we need to present this to the partnership, and then we did it, but after the term sheet was signed already. My point being, most investors can make a decision without a pitch deck. So actually not having one kind of lets the conversation go more naturally, and then they're more engaged because they're asking questions. So I don't know, it may not work for everyone, at least for us, not having a pitch deck worked much better than having one.
So what do you think convinced them? What would you think was that secret sauce, or that thing that just pushed them over the edge and said yes?
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, which is a lot of people, they try to not get no's with investors, and instead what I think is the reasons investors say no are different from the opposite of the reasons investors say no are not the reasons they say yes.
Valid point, yeah.
So, it seems counterintuitive, right? So the reason they always say no for you is something around market or traction, right? Your revenues are just not there yet, or, we're not very sure of this market, or something that, gives them the optionality to then go back to you in case your revenues explode, right? But the reason they say yes most of the times is if they believe that the team can execute on that market. If they believe that the team can execute on that market, especially in the early rounds, there's no metrics that make or break that. Mm-hmm. So I would say and people start opening and they start saying these are my numbers and my revenues because they're trying to not get a no. Instead, what I think works the best is when you want to more get to the yes, which is more focus on your personal story and why are you the founder to execute in this market, and why the market is a great opportunity, and about the idea and the vision, and and then the traction is just a validation to your entire vision, instead of like, just the numbers by itself. But because the reasons investors say no a lot of time is because of like, traction or something like that, you try to preempt that, but just talking about that or thinking that that is what you need to do, if that makes sense.
So yeah, it absolutely does. So did you have a verbal elevator pitch that you would give? Is there something you want to actually share maybe right now?
I did. I just don't remember it on the spot. It evolved so much. But it was something, hey, we're going to build credit card for startups, and, startups have very low risk because they have tons of money in their bank account and they still can't get a card. So.
Awesome. Thank you. I've got a question from the audience that actually wants you to give a high overview of the VR pitch that got you in YC. So that's going to make you dig really deep in your memory.
Well, if you're actually interested, our thesis was, and, we admit it wasn't the best idea, so bear with me. I actually don't think it's a bad idea, it's just really hard to execute. So our vision was like phones, they have more pixels now and like that little screen than like computer monitors that were 24 inches had for like a long time, right? So our idea was like, why can't you create like external displays so you can like work from your phone, but like on big monitors? That was the idea.
All right. Well, I hope whoever asked that question is satisfied with that answer. Do you have plans to spread your business in Brazil?
I'd love to. For now, we're pretty focused on the U.S. just because the opportunity here is so massive. It's, if you look at Square, for example, the biggest Square competitor in the world is probably, worth like maybe $3 billion in Europe or something like that, and Square is worth 30 just by focusing on the U.S. And they might have lost the U.S. to other competitors if they hadn't focused so much here. So for now, we're pretty focused.
Now, speaking about these valuations, now a year after your Series A, you went ahead and did your Series B, and soon after your Series C, you're at over $1 billion in valuation. How were you able to scale so quickly?
I think we're a mix of a few things, but basically a mix of like very strong product market fit. As I said, like, I don't know if there's any customers here, but it's around 50% of the customers we talk to end up using Brex. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, it was hard to build, but once it was there, it was a very obvious pitch. Like a lot of people just, yeah, that makes sense. No personal guarantee, better rewards, better technology, better support, better everything. Like, why not? So there was a lot of traction very quick in a big market that hasn't been disrupted. I think that was one, but more than that, I think it was the team. Like we were able to recruit kind of like really good executives early on, and they helped us like not commit a lot of mistakes. So we had built a startup before, so we tried to avoid some mistakes, and all the executives that we hired had been in kind of high growth startups before. So they have helped us avoid more mistakes that they've seen in their own startups, right? And that was very helpful in scaling really, really fast. But we definitely didn't do it perfectly.
You want to share some of the things that maybe you didn't do or didn't go as well as you had planned? Was there any advice that maybe you did get that you didn't take?
Every founder's going to say it is the same, but fire faster than you imagine. Mm-hmm. It's like there's someone who's not working. You think it's going to work if you just put more time and more energy, like 9 out of 10, in a startup, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. There's not much. Either people adapt to the startup mentality of, getting things done fast and working and like doing everything, or they don't. It's really hard to convert someone in the speed that you need.
How was it then in terms of building your team? How did you find your teammates? Because you grew pretty quickly. What size is your team right now?
We're a little bit over 300 people.
Mm-hmm. And that's in how many years?
2.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So was there a process behind that in terms of recruiting, hiring, searching for these people? How did you determine who you wanted on the team?
Yeah, I think like you have to keep the bar very high. Otherwise, they bring it's kind of well known, but if you bring B people, they bring other B people. Mm-hmm. So you have to keep the bar pretty high. I think the other thing that's helpful is actually bringing more executives around. Mm-hmm. So, we hired our head of sales when we had like maybe 2 salespeople. Mm. But he knew what great salespeople looked like. So
Right.
he helped us recruit really great salespeople, and great salespeople wanted to work for him, right? So that is like a virtuous cycle. When you pass like all your direct reports, having actual leaders that, know how and help recruit is really helpful.
How does it feel for yourself as being the youngest unicorn founder in history?
I don't know if that's true, but if it is,
In under 2 years, it is, I think.
yeah. It feels like we have a lot of pressure
Yeah?
to keep doing that.
You want to talk a little bit more about that pressure? You and your co-founder obviously share that? How do you guys deal with it?
Again, it's,
Do you have any coping mechanisms for it?
the thing is, like, it's definitely helpful. All these, like, people say, oh, vanity metrics don't matter, right? Like, oh, valuation doesn't matter, and like, all these vanity metrics. What matters is like revenue growth, and that's true. But like vanity metrics actually help, like, because there's a lot of people that want to work at Brex now because of it, right?
Yeah.
So it does actually help. The thing is, whenever you're in the company, you need to just make sure that everybody in the company knows that it is a vanity metric, and you still need to win, right? And you need to work really hard to get there. Like, we haven't won yet. And I think that's a very important message that you have to keep reinforcing, because, you start having like nice offices, and, the money of these little things won't make a difference, but, you still need to be frugal, right? And all these things.
Right. Was there any different expectations that you found from your family or for your friends when this happened?
They're mostly in Brazil.
Yeah.
So they're not really into the Silicon Valley, TechCrunch scene. I think it just, it's like just validation, right? Oh, they're doing something like cool. You see it in the news.
Question from the audience is, what are your views on bootstrapping?
So our first company, it wasn't fully bootstrapped, but it was, there's a lot of aspects to it. So we raised $300,000. It was the only money we raised, and we had to become profitable from, year one. And there's a few advantages and disadvantages. The advantage that we found was it kind of forces you to find product market fit. Because like if you're not building a product that customers are willing to pay for, you run out of business. Like there's no other option besides doing that. So it kind of forces you in this mindset of like product market fit at all costs, which I think is super helpful. I think it's very dangerous for startups. They raised a bunch of money before product market fit, and then they hired a bunch of people, and then they're trying to build an organization and a company before they have a product that works. I think that's like really dangerous. The part that sucks, it's really hard to attract really good talent. Like, turns out most of the talent go to the venture-backed stuff. And, if you really want to build a really big company, you need to have the best talent. So it's really hard to do that, being bootstrapped. So I think that, if the ambition is to be a medium-sized business that's, profitable and, generating profits for the founders for, some period of time, then I think it's fine. But if it's really hard to create a bootstrap business that gets really big, right? And for us, we think it's fun to try to build something really big.
Awesome. Now, when it comes to talent, we were talking about that again. What do you think it took for you to be able to attract, high-level executives or the really great talent? And can you walk a little bit through what it was like to try and hire this level of talent when you were bootstrapping versus, or when you just started Brex versus now being a unicorn? Let's maybe walk through that a little bit, the difference.
Yeah, definitely easier when you're a unicorn.
Yeah.
It's so funny actually. Like people say, I got quoted when we raised this last round, and I said, oh, this is just a repricing event because it helps in recruiting. And then like a bunch of people quoted me like, oh, like why does it help in recruiting if like now the price is higher, the upside is lower? It's like, well, logically that makes sense, but most people, they have risk reward ratios that the less people want to join early stage stuff that goes to zero, and they have to take a huge pay cut and all that. A lot more people want to join a little bit larger and established. Just look the amount of people the big companies have versus the amount of people startups have, right? Like, it's more people decide to join big companies. And medium-sized companies is kind of the perfect sweet spot of risk reward. There's still a lot of upside, but it's not going to zero. So It's definitely gets easier over time. Like your first 10 hires are really, 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 really hard. Like no one wanted to work for us. It sucked.
What did you do to convince those people?
Yeah, so the first thing is if you try to like find more, at least for us, like business-minded people, it would work easier. And the important thing to hire more experienced people is that they're not like venture capitalists. They can't just trust that you have some product with traction and then you'll figure the rest out. You kind of have to show them a plan. Like, hey, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and these are the steps to get there. If you're pitching at early stage VC, you might get away with like, hey, this is our product, and it's getting traction, and that's it. If you're pitching like an executive to join your company, they want to see like what are all the steps that you get to be a startup to being a big company, and they need to find it
They
possible.
want to know you've got a plan.
Yeah, exactly. So having that a little bit more crafted helps a lot.
How many of those that you had in that first 10 are still around?
Maybe 8.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another question actually about talent. So when you're recruiting in the middle stage, right, and you don't quite have that brand awareness, how do you handle that? And I actually want to know, these 10 people, did you go out and find them? Did they find you? Did you have a recruiter? I know you mentioned you got a CFO and a general counsel really early.
Yeah.
At what point did you bring in a people officer?
So people took a long time. We were looking for like a year and a half. We just hired one like 2 months ago. So what we did to recruit is the executives were like through the investor network, but the engineers, which honestly are even harder. There's these recruiters where they only charge you if you hire someone. We just had 30 of those engaged.
Right.
So we basically, just found all these recruiters that, if you hire someone that they send, you pay them. If you don't, you don't.
Right.
And we just engaged tons of them.
The contingency.
And then,
yeah.
and then it
Awesome.
worked.
So let me go back to some of my questions I had. So now it's, fast forwarding. What are the kinds of challenges that you're facing as a 2.5-year-old fintech startup that is already at the unicorn stage? Are there sacrifices that you're having to make, both professionally and personally? Let's talk through those challenges now.
It is harder to build a culture when you're going from 70 to 300 in a year than it is when you're going from 70 to 140. So you have to do a lot more work on the culture piece than if you were growing slower. So a big part of our time, my co-founder and I, is kind of thinking and building culture. More than the percentage that a regular startup would have growing slower, just because, every 3 months, 25% of the company is, new, right? So I think that's one of the things.
How did you manage that?
You just have to repeat yourself a lot. So just like every all hands, the meeting that everyone, all hands. You have to say the same stuff, and half of your people are like, oh, I can't hear this anymore. You say it every week, and then the other half wasn't there. So
It's like raising kids, consistency. Yes. You have to say the same message over and over again.
Exactly. So you just have to do that a lot, and spend a lot of your time purposely thinking about what are the communication systems, how do you make sure that the new person actually hears this message? Should it be in the onboarding, but you can't put everything on the onboarding. Should it be, doing their management training sessions, when should each person receive each information, and try to architect those things, which is a completely different set of problems.
Are there other third-party sort of services or solutions that you guys use within Brex that you think are worth it or not worth it? That's a question from the audience. What other external resources are
so
available
2 of our
to people?
customers, we actually love talking about the communication stuff. So there's one company called Retool that we really like, which
What's
is
it called?
Retool.
Retool.
You basically build internal tools. So internal tools is take a long time to build, and you can build internal tools with a few clicks on Retool. It was from our batch, and I think if Retool goes out of business, Brex will have a lot of work to change everything. It's on-prem, so it would be fine, but we build a lot of our internal systems on this. And the other one on this communication architecture, we use this thing called Threads, which is basically an internal messaging board that we use for everything, basically.
Very cool. I do have another question from the audience, and it's going back to recruiting. So I think a lot of people are interested in how you built your team. Can you describe an ideal or a valuable recruiter? So I know you mentioned just bringing people that were in contingency. You hired most of your executives through the investor network. But is there something that you would advise in terms of what do you look for in a recruiter? And who do you think, based on the ones, you had 30 of them helping you out. Did any of them stick out for you or anything?
Honestly, the best ones are those who create actual long-term relationships with, the people they meet. So it's not just like them mass emailing and then if someone is interested, they pass it to you. It's like, the really good recruiters, they create real relationships with the people they're recruiting through multiple steps of their careers. So it's not that, so the person who's being recruited feels that the recruiter is both on their side and the company's side, not just trying to convince them about the company, I think that's the big difference.
How involved are you in the recruiting now? Obviously in the beginning you must have been very
Well,
involved
on
with
exec
every hire.
recruiting, super involved.
Right.
On the regular recruiting, I'm very much part of the sale chat for people we want to hire. So, selling the Brex is a great idea.
Awesome. What's next for Brex, financially speaking? Are you looking to raise again? Are you thinking of doing an IPO?
So we're probably pretty far from going public. We're 2.5 years old. So, I think
But
companies
you've been
take
doing
too long.
everything kind of fast forward, right?
Yeah. So I'm not, but that one I don't think we're close. So with raising money, there's a big difference between raising money when you're kind of like in the earlier stage and later stage. The biggest difference is like on the earlier stage, you're not sure anyone is going to fund you. So you're not 100% sure like if you'll actually get a term sheet and people actually want to give you any money. On the later stage, everyone wants to give you money at a certain price. The difference is just like what is that price, right?
Did you ever invest any of your own money in Brex at any point?
Yeah. On the first round, we invested a bunch of money.
Nice, okay.
Yeah.
That was a question from the audience. I wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, we got like a third of all the money we made the other company invested in Brex.
Wonderful.
But anyway, so going back to the thing, so on later stages, if someone gives us the right price, we would probably raise, if that makes sense. There's no reason not to at this point. It's just about the matter like when is that right time and the right price and the right investor.
What would you do with it? I mean, I'm always told that you raise when you know that you have something that you have to do with it. Do
So we
you
disagree
believe in
with
that?
that. No.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
You will always need money at some point eventually. The only point is is it the right moment to raise to optimize for dilution or not? And again, on the later stages, right? On the earlier stages is a little bit different. So we raise when we think we're in a position of strength, the position of the most strength, instead of when we absolutely need the money, because we probably have money for the next couple of years, right? So we would probably not do anything differently than we're doing today.
Are you at all concerned about any sort of recession going on? How do you think Brex would perform during a recession?
So anyone that actually says they know how their company would perform during a recession is lying, because every recession is very different. Like 2001, 2008, those two crises completely different. You can't even compare those two things. So would Brex perform well? We have a bunch of theories on yes and why, but you can't actually know. The only thing you can do is then raise a bunch of money, so in case there is a recession, you're not stuck, to make payroll.
So going back to the people piece again, as you're finding this great success, has your hiring focus changed? So I know in the beginning you said you were really focused on getting the right executives in place, and then it became the engineering talent. Where are you at right now as your team is 300 plus?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us now is to hire that layer of leaders under the executives. I think that's one of the big challenges, which is it's not someone that's going to report to the CEO, but someone that's very senior that's going to report to someone that reports to the CEO, right? So that is a little bit of the challenge now. So for example, we I think just signed this week a head of data, right? Which is a search we were running for 13 months.
Wow.
those kind of leaders, like they're not directly, they don't report to CEO, they report to our head of engineering, but they're also super important, super senior. So they're challenging. And the second thing is very senior engineers. So, as we scale, like, we need senior engineers in like every single team to make sure, we're building things the right way. And those are really hard to hire in Silicon Valley.
Now, there are companies that prefer a flatter structure, and you clearly have built, an actual organization.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, and what do you think are the pros and cons of both types of organization?
I think that it depends on what you want to optimize. If you want to optimize for like creativity, the flat structure is probably better if like everyone is like wants to have a bigger voice and kind of build their own stuff. And a lot of times in consumer business you kind of don't know what's going to work, right? So you kind of need to let people do their own thing, and there's a place for that. And if you have more hierarchy, you optimize for speed, right? And keep building and executing. For our business, we're optimizing more for speed. Because we kind of, like in B2B, you have this great advantage that you can actually ask your customers what they want, and they'll tell you. Consumers is really hard to do that. With businesses, it's much easier. So we kind of know what we have to build. We just have to execute on it quicker, and having a more hierarchical structure helps us execute on it quicker.
Awesome. I'm glad you talked about your customers. I'm going to go through a whole bunch of questions from the audience because we are running out of time, so I want to try and cover as many. So they may be in different orders, so just bear with me.
Okay.
But somebody did want to know how you found your first corporate customers for Brex.
It was our best friend from Brazil that's just started a startup.
Awesome. That's great. And then let's see. When and how did you exactly understand and validate that there's a good product market fit for Brex?
When we started giving out cards and people were using and we were making money and they were happy.
Awesome. If you had to do it again, would you go through Y Combinator or some other incubator again? And then what are the 5 things that YC helped you with?
I would go through Y Combinator, yes. The thing that helps a lot is, one, it kind of puts you on a pace. Like you need to get traction or get an idea until demo day. So you can't kind of like slack it off or take too much time. Like it's kind of like this intensity, and there's all these peers who are like doing something much more awesome than you are, and then there's like kind of like this little bit competitive environment, so it kind of pushes you. So that's like super, super good. And I think economically it just pays for itself. Like if you went to YC, your valuation will be 7% higher, for sure. Like there's no question than if you didn't go through YC. So, it kind of pays for itself in terms of the economics, and being able to, especially if you're B2B, sell to all the other YC companies from your batch is like super valuable.
Nice. What advice would you have for founders who are struggling to find that product market fit?
Iterate faster. Talk to your customers a lot, iterate faster, and just, keep going. Just don't think that is going to be this one killer feature or like this thing that takes 6 months to build that will make people want you. Just like keep doing things fast.
What is your favorite book recommendation you would give to a fellow startup founder?
This is kind of, I would say like a post-product market fit book would be 7 Powers of Business Strategy. Which kind of thinks about a little bit longer term modes and things like that. Before product market fit, don't read, just work and get product market fit.
Awesome. Now, I already asked you this question, but somebody wants to know, so maybe we need to just sort of iterate on it a little bit, is how are you keeping up with all the hiring process right now with such high growth going on? And how many more are you trying to hire? You can do a shameless plug right now.
Yeah, we're definitely, I think we're 300, we're going to be like 400 to the end of the year.
Wait, by the end of this year?
Yeah.
Okay, people.
Yeah, so.
Any referral bonuses that you want to advertise right here?
We pay really well.
There you go.
In an awesome place. So, I think that Again, the secret is just being relentless about the bar and not letting the urgency of the hire reduce the quality of the people. And the way you do that is by hiring people earlier than you need them. So let's say you'll need a position in like 6 months. Like start hiring it now. And maybe it takes you a month and you hire them and that person has 5 more months to onboard. Or maybe it takes you 5 months to find someone, you know? And hiring great people takes time. So start early. Even if it doesn't seem that that person wouldn't have a full-time job today, they will in 6 months. So just plan ahead.
Would you ever hire remote teams?
So we haven't figured out remote yet. We're now figuring out distributed offices. So we have 3 and now opening our 4th office.
Where are they all?
San Francisco, Vancouver, Salt Lake City, and New York. So we haven't figured out remote, like work from home yet, because we haven't figured out how to instill culture and things like that in remote. But on remote offices, or other offices, we don't even call them remote offices.
How do you feel about the unlimited vacation policies? Is that something you guys do as well?
So, in Brazil, people actually take more vacation than they do here in the US. Everyone takes like 4 weeks there. Here it's like 2 weeks, basically. And I feel that, at least for my life, I like working really hard and taking a little bit more vacation than working less hard in the day-to-day and then taking less vacation. And it's just, I don't know if it's a country thing or not. So it works really well for me.
When did you last take a vacation?
I took one, I went to Burning Man like everyone else. So.
Was that vacation though, or was that really
No,
work?
not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So in
So
July.
when did you last? You took
July.
in July.
Yeah.
What's your favorite vacation place?
Anywhere that has a beach. I really like beaches.
Awesome. Do you scuba dive?
I do. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Awesome. Let's see. I've got only one more question, and I do want to actually end with this one. Do you ever run into the issue of people judging your ability based on your age?
So, the good answer there would be yes, and it's so hard and like we should overcome it, working hard. The reality is, turns out in Silicon Valley, if you're younger, it's actually easier. It's people give you a lot of credit if you're younger. If you're older, you have to have done a lot of stuff, for people to give you credit. So I thought it always helped me, honestly.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Henrique. Do you have any last maybe pearls of wisdom you want to share with the audience before we close it off?
Well, it's a half, pearl of wisdom, half a little bit of a plug, but I wouldn't have been able to start Brex if I hadn't worked in fintech before. Like, the execution needed to go very smoothly in order to start Brex. So, if you're entrepreneurial and you're interested in starting like a company or a fintech company after, actually, working at Brex was probably one of the best ideas you could do.
Well, you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Also, did you want to say anything else?